So first and foremost, I want to congratulate you on your new documentary, Line the Saga of Andy Hernandez. So I know a lot of people have been talking about it, so let's get into that.
What inspired you to make a documentary about Takashi 69?
Well, I think that the process of making a documentary can often start with just a hunch or an idea. And so I, just like anybody else, had heard of Takashi 69, was looking into it, was sort of nerding out on his Instagram and just wondering who is this kid. And at a certain point, I just picked up my phone and I DM'd his manager Shadi and had this idea, and then I kind of forgot about it, following him. And soon after that, he was arrested. It became big news, and he was being charged with racketeering, 47 years to life. And it was around that time I started thinking, like, this is a great idea. I should keep going into it. And because this is happening in Brooklyn, I'd been to the bodega you worked at. I It just felt like I was just on the edge of what was happening, and I was just one or two people away. Uh, New York is a small place, and if you just start asking people and talking to people, you can get into a really interesting story. So,
Why did you use his real name in the title instead of his stage name?
well, I felt like part of the full film is to understand identity and question what is the true identity of a person. Is it the exterior persona, or is it a person underneath? And I just felt like that is a primary question in the film, and it is a journey that I went on to meet all the people that knew Danny, who watched him transform into Takashi 69, and that's why we put that in the title. Because I do think at the end of the day, this is just the journey of a person, of a kid who decided to take some steps and went down a path to fame and fortune that brought so much else, and transformed himself and his identity in the process. I think that there's good and bad things about humanizing a rapper. Danny Hernandez sounds a lot less threatening than Takashi 69, and in some ways, he sounds less than some of the gang members who have slightly more, I don't know, edgy names. But I think that's just part of the story, and it's up to people to decide whether he's really Danny or if he's 6'9".
Do you remember where you were the first time you heard Takashi 69?
I mean, it was somewhere I was looking at my phone. I think it came from a conversation. I was looking at all of these SoundCloud rappers. As growing up on 90s hip hop and living most of my life in New York and having my own obsession with rap music at the time when I was Danny's age, um, I just was looking into what was going on in hip hop, and I felt a little divorced from the new reality of what SoundCloud rap was. So I started discovering all these other people, whose music I started listening to and trying out. And so, discovering a number of rappers with face tattoos, with a punk style, with a new sound, something that didn't feel like it came from, what we consider hip hop, but was actually rap. So I was introduced to Takashi 69 in that whole phenomenon of discovering SoundCloud rap and wanting to see what this whole thing was. And Takashi 69 just started coming out from that whole journey to understand that and look into music right now. He just stood out as the most interesting, compelling, and most loaded story in it. And that's so I'm not so as far as like when did I first see him? I don't know. I think it probably came in a package with some other people I was looking at, and then I just started going down that rabbit hole that a lot of people have, and that's sort of how we got famous, is people like me leaning in and looking and wondering what the fuck is this kid.
What is the most outstanding piece of information you discovered while making this documentary?
So much of this story has been printed in the press. It's been written about for years. It's been tracked by journalists. We worked with court reporters, and we worked with um, people who've been tracking the story a long time. And that was really important to vetting all of the facts in the film and trying to make sure we told an accurate story. So it's not so much about the pieces of information we gathered, but actually finally meeting the people who are involved and hearing their emotional story. I think the one thing that I learned in making it is that we, I think we all like indulge in the veneer of gangs and the personas of hip hop and all of this mythology that's been created, especially online around 6ix9ine, the Bloods, and all of that. But at the end of the day, like everyone's just a regular person, and all of these people that are being perceived as scary gangsters or demonized or glorified, when it came down to it, I was meeting families. I met people who were talking more about friendship than they were about something far beyond that. And so that's what I think the most sort of I think the most interesting part is just how human the whole story is. That yes, this person hit astronomical numbers when it comes to fame, but what it came down to is you keep your friends around as you become famous. Is fame and fortune more important than the people who got you there? And how do you deal with people if you're using each other to get there? Those are all things that everyone who's in the arts or any sort of business or any part of life really gets to have to deal with. So I think that sort of humanity of everybody and just like, being able to put a real person to the face and name that we see in the press, that's like the most important part for me making this film.
Who do you think has 6ix9ine's loyalty?
When you look at the film and when you reflect on his story, it's about the situation that someone's in, right? Of course I think he's loyal to himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he is quite loyal to his family. He says that he only had his mother and his brother, and they trooped it out. So I could imagine he's loyal to them, and honestly, I think that when it comes to his inner life, the film is really just is trying to probe into that. But I think that only really he knows who he's fully loyal to. I think though, this situation he put himself in made loyalty a pretty logistically difficult and probably pretty hard for any young person to deal with. I mean, if you think about most young people's careers, we just are reading about Taylor Swift dealing with her contracts and her music. People are put into situations in business, in art, when fame is attached that are extremely complicated. And it takes a long time for people to deal with it and understand what relationships they're in. And I think when you look at his journey, I mean, he was working with a number of people who were affiliated in a gang who he did not have exact contracts with or real deals with, things that are not governed by the same rules of a lot of the things in entertainment often are. So I can see that his life got really complicated. And, so when I think comes to loyalty, there's probably a logistical problem with that also. But I think otherwise, I think he built his persona and his career with the help of other people, and I think you could see somebody climbing the rungs of a ladder to fame and fortune, and some of those people stayed with him, and some of those people didn't, as you can see in the film. There are a lot of people who are still admirers of him, still work with him, still hope to work with him, and then there's a lot of people who feel screwed over or feel as if they didn't have a good relationship with him or he took advantage of them. So I think that it's hard to know exactly who he's loyal to, but I think you could see the complicated nature of all his relationships.
What do you think was his worst career mistake?
Oh, well, I think the film shows that there is not one mistake, but a series of them, and each of those mistakes was also, a rung in the ladder for success. So uh, I think that's kind of why the story I think that's why his story feels like a bit of a train wreck when you watch it. In earlier versions of the film, I compared it to a car crash that you just can't look away from. So it's a strange thing when it comes to the attention economy that we live in, that oftentimes major mistakes are huge gifts. And I think at the end of the day, just getting into violent crime to promote music and stepping from the fantasy world into the real world, I think I think that is the mistake that no artist should really cross, is actually endangering other people and committing crimes with the hopes of gaining attention. I think that's across the board what anybody would take away from a big mistake, as a big mistake.
Do you believe Danny Hernandez at his core is a good person?
Steve, I'm optimistic about everybody. I think that anybody can turn themselves around. I'm not like somebody who thinks that people are evil, with the exception, I think after 4 years of Trump, it's a hard thing to say that. But I think he's a young guy who made mistakes. I don't think of him as like a bad person or a good person. I think of him as somebody who has a story that we can look into, learn from, be entertained by. But that's not sort of my place to judge somebody if they're a good or bad person. I don't think that's my place. That's not what I was after. I think that the film is going to make everybody ask those questions. That's part of my hope, is for you to think, is this a good person or a bad person? And I just think with everyone, it's like it's never so black and white. There's a lot of gray area, and I think that's where our characters come from. We live in a time where flawed characters, um, we all love them. I mean, people watch them in fiction all the time, and you see that in villains. And Danny is somebody who created himself as a villain. Whether he's a good person acting bad or a bad person who's trying to do good, that's not my place to say. I think people should watch the movie, and I think people can make their own judgments. But I think there's something extremely human about his story, extremely telling about our times, and extremely sort of terrifying about how fame and fortune can lead people astray.